I'm Jill with Mobile Public Library, and ordinarily I would be hosting a knitting program every Thursday afternoon at West Regional Library where we just get together and talk about what we're currently working on and exchange tips and just chit chat while we're working on our current knitting projects. But right now we can't do that, so it got me thinking about what could I do with knitting right now with the social distancing. And I was just thinking that if you ever wanted to learn how to knit, now is an excellent time to do it because it is a good at-home hobby. So I personally learned how to knit using YouTube, but I also had a couple people try to teach me how to knit, and I was just not getting it, and it just worked better for me when I could do it at my own pace in front of my computer by myself and no one looking over my shoulder. But because I had a couple people trying to teach me, I wasn't starting 100% from scratch. I kind of knew what I needed to know. But if you're starting cold and you're looking at YouTube, there are thousands of different knitting videos out there, and it could be kind of confusing and overwhelming and not knowing where to start. Now, if you really want something very structured, Universal Class does have a knitting program, so I'm going to put a link to that in the information box, so you can start with the Universal Class knitting class if that's the route you want to go. But personally, I find that just a little too structured for my taste, so I'm going to tell you how I learned. First off, if you want to learn how to knit, you got to start with some supplies. For materials, there are tons of different things on the knitting aisle, but you really don't need all that stuff to start with. All you really need is some yarn and some needles. I recommend a light colored, just a basic worsted yarn, and for needles, just pick up something inexpensive and sort of a medium size. You can spend all kinds of money on needles and yarn and get some really nice stuff, but I recommend sticking with something inexpensive for now because you don't want to spend a lot of money on the wrong thing. Everybody's got their own personal preferences, and until you have knit for a while, you don't know what you're really looking for. So wait till later and then invest in a really nice set once you know exactly what you want. Okay, now once you have got your materials, there's actually only 4 things you need to learn to do. Once you learn those 4 things, you can knit pretty much anything. You need to learn a cast on, knit, purl, and cast off or bind off. We'll start with the cast on, and I'm going to go ahead and start casting these on. And now, one of the reasons I say you only have to learn 4 things is because everything else you do in knitting is some combination of variation of those 4 things. So if you get those 4 things down pat, you can knit just about anything. Okay, so I am going to cast on some stitches, and now casting on, there are a bunch of different ways you can cast on. The one I use is the long tail slingshot method, and I am going to put, and don't worry about if you don't see what I'm doing here, I'm going to put links to videos in the box below that are recorded in professional studios by people who know a lot more about knitting than I ever will. So you should be able to get a really good explanation and a very clear view of what they're doing. As I was saying, there are multiple ways you can do cast on, but you only really need to know one good cast on. I have learned 3 or 4 different methods over the years, but I don't remember any of them except for the long tail because that's the one I use all the time. A lot of knitting patterns will just say cast on. You can use whichever one you want, and even if they do have a particular cast on there, a lot of times you can just substitute in whichever one you want. If it is a pattern where you need to do a very specific cast on to get a very specific beginning edge, once you've learned one really well, it's usually not too hard to pick up the others. So, but anyway, just concentrate on learning one. I'll put several in the information box. If you can't learn one, just move on to the next one. As long as you can find one that clicks for you, you're good to go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let me do 2 more, so I'll do 10 stitches on my needles. And the casting on, all it means is get some stitches on your needle. There's 10 stitches here, 10 little loops. So I've got 10 stitches cast on. So now the next step is to knit and purl. Knit and purl are just the reverse of each other. They're basically the same thing, and that is the bulk of knitting. The cast on is just giving you the starting edge. All the rest of it is going to be made up of knit and purl. So this first row I'm going to knit. To knit, you stick your needle in the back of the stitch, loop your thread around, pull it through the front of the stitch, and then you pull the old stitch off the needle. And I just keep doing that till I reach the end of the row. And again, I'm going to put links in the bottom, in the information box, to various different demonstrations of knitting. You will come across, some people will say they're doing it continental style, and some people will say they're doing it English or American style. And you may also see some people say that they're doing it Eastern or Western or combination. And that is actually just means they're holding their needle and their thread a certain way. I knit English style. But anyway, all these different methods are just different ways of holding and feeding your yarn into the needles. And some people are better at one than the other. I've tried continental, I just cannot grasp it. I always drop stitches. But then there are people in my knitting group who always do continental, and they're like, I just don't get an English or American style, because American and English style are the same thing. I said, just try the different methods, see what feels most comfortable for you, and stick with that. Because you can't, it makes absolutely no difference to the final product. You can't look at a knitted something or other and see if it's continental or see if it's English. There's no right and wrong here. It's just different people have different, like they want to thread their yarn through this hand or that hand, or hold their needles a certain way. So like I said, there's going to be a variety of links down the bottom, and just try different ones to see which one works for you. Okay, so I finished the first row, and now I'm going to purl the next row, and the purl is just the opposite of the knit. You stick the needle in the front of the stitch and loop your thread around, and then you pull the loop out the back of the stitch, and you pull the stitch off the old stitch off the needle. And I'll just keep doing that for this other row. And the purl, like I said, is the same thing as the knit, in that there's English style and there's continental style, and there's Eastern or Western, which just means that you wrap the thread clockwise or counterclockwise. And combination means you wrap it one way for one stitch and one way for another stitch, which is I believe what I do. And again, it's just personal preference. You don't need to worry about it too much. Just follow along with the different videos, and whatever feels comfortable to you, just do that. And you don't even really need to know what it's called. You just need to know if you're knitting or you're purling. So anyway, so there we go. I got a row of knit and a row of purl, and as you can see, it's starting to make fabric. And this is actually called a stockinette stitch if you're alternating knit and purl, which is why I said all you really need to learn is knit and purl, because all of your other stitches, like if you hear garter, seam, stockinette, it's some pattern of knitting and purling. So if you learn the knitting and purling really well, you can do all those other different stitches. Once you've got as much fabric as you want knitted, and it's going to come off your needle, and once it looks like it's the right length, and if you're doing a pattern, it'll tell you how many rows to do. But so once you've reached the length you want, then you want to cast off or bind off, which just means that you are going to loop one stitch over the next stitch all the way down the row until you get to the end. So that way when you pull it, it'll come off the needle, and it won't unravel. So let me just demonstrate that real quick. So I will knit 2 stitches, and then I pull this stitch over the other stitch, and then I'll knit another stitch and pull this over. And I'll keep going until I get to the end of the row. And again, I will put I'll put links in the bottom about how you do that. And those are basically all the things you need to know to knit. And it's actually fairly simple to learn to knit. Now, don't get me wrong, just because I say it's simple doesn't mean it is easy. Everyone's first project is a disaster, so don't get upset if yours does not come out right, if you start dropping stitches and you've got holes and you've got lumps and bumps and you can't figure out what you did wrong. If that happens, that just means you're normal. No one's first project comes out right. Because just because you're watching a video and you understand what the person's doing doesn't mean you can get your fingers to go that same way. It takes a while to kind of build up the muscle memory so that you are kind of like doing the stitches just the same way, very neatly just automatically. So, you know, that you just keep practicing, it'll come to you eventually. But just because, you know, your first project does not look all neat and perfect like the example videos do, you know, don't just get discouraged. I would be shocked if your first project did come out all neat and even. It's like I said, it just takes time. So, but if you keep with it, you'll get it eventually. Okay, so I finished my little thing, and now it'd be good to have some scissors, which I do not have handy. But you know, I didn't put that on the equipment list because most people do have scissors. All you'd have to do is cut the yarn off the ball and then pull it through the loop, and then this will be a done little piece of knitted fabric. Okay, now before I completely close out this video, I do want to share a couple of projects that I've been working on. One, I just finished the front panel of a scale mail knit sweater. And this is where you actually knit the scales into the fabric as you build up the fabric. If anyone is interested in that, let me know. I'd be more than happy to do like a little scale mail tutorial. Like I said, I finished the front panel. I've got to do the back panel now, which is going to be just plain fabric. It's not going to have any scales in it, which is going to be a lot easier than doing this front panel. And then I'll just sew the two sides together and I'll have my little sweater. And then the other thing I just recently completed is my little stuffed elephant. I think he turned out really good, even though I kind of sewed him together wonky. He's a little uneven, but he's still super cute, and he still needs a name. So if you've got a good suggestion for him, for his name, please leave me a comment below, because he needs a proper name. I have been thinking about further videos I might be able to do. I could do, say, like a scale mail tutorial if you're interested in that, or I could do like a run through of how do you knit a pattern, which, you know, I've got a free pattern. If anyone wants the pattern for knitting this little guy, I can certainly send it to you. But leave me a comment below if you're interested in more knitting videos and what you would like me to cover next. I said I am open to suggestions, and don't forget to name this little guy. I hope everyone's having a great day, and I'll see you next time. So bye-bye.